Hello, everyone, and welcome to this ItaliaPass Ready for Florence orientation webinar. My name is Shelley Ruel, and I am the community manager here at ItaliaPass. And today we're going to talk about a few important points of information to help you get ready for visiting Florence, as well as to give you a little bit of information about how ItaliaPass can help you to have a more relaxing and enjoyable vacation in Florence with some of our membership benefits. So to get started, I want to go over very quickly what is ItaliaPass. Many of you are probably here because you purchased a rail ticket with Italia Rail. So there's a whole family of brands, the Italia brands, that includes Italia Rail, tours, drive, and hotels. And since 1987, these brands have worked with millions of tourists who are visiting Italy. And our CEO decided that he wanted to make a product that would also help all of his customers have the best trip to Italy ever. So he created ItaliaPass, which is a membership benefits program for travelers to Italy like yourself. And for $149, it gives you over $650 in value during your Italy trip. So we'll be talking just a little bit about ItaliaPass today to see if that's something that might work out with your vacation plans and be something that could enhance your Italy trip, as well as sharing some information and helpful tips for you today about getting around Florence and then getting the most out of your trip to Florence. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to tell you what we'll cover today. We'll start out with arriving into Florence. So there's a couple of different ways you may arrive into Florence. We'll talk about arriving at the airport and the train station and how you can get into the city from the airport. We'll talk about how to get around Florence. What are the best ways to get around the city? A couple of things about restaurants and how to avoid tourist traps. I'll also be talking about how you can get complimentary access to some of the most famous sites and tours, and how you can get $100 off of an Italia Tours experience. And then I'll wrap up with a couple of hidden gems that you may not know about in Florence and a couple of local tips. So let's get started with how you will arrive into Florence and what are the best ways to get into the city. Now, many of you may arrive by train. Some of you may arrive by flight. So this is for those of you who are arriving at the airport. The airport in Florence is called Amerigo Vespucci. It's about a half hour outside of the city center. So there's a couple of ways to get into the city. If you have light luggage and you're on a budget, then the best way for you will probably be to take public transport into the city. There's a very easy way to get from the Florence airport into the city center, and that is by tram. So the tram station, as you can see in this photo on the bottom in the center, there's a tram that pulls right into the airport. It's the T2 tram. So it's directly in the airport. So all you have to do is once you leave the airport, you're going to walk 3 minutes to the Paretto Aeroporto tram stop. Just follow the signs. And the tram ride is about 20 to 25 minutes to get into the city. Now, this is an extremely great option if you're on a budget because the ticket only costs €1.70. And that ticket is a public transport ticket that's valid for 90 minutes on all of Florence's local public transport. The tram takes you to Firenze Santa Maria Novella. That's Florence's central train station. So it's going to take you right into the heart of the city. You're going to get off at the tram stop called Alamani, and then you walk for 2 minutes to get to the train station. So that's the way that you can get to the city with public transport. If you would like something a little bit more comfortable and convenient, especially if you're arriving with a lot of luggage, then there's the option to take a taxi. The official Florence city taxis have a fixed rate from the airport to the city. Now, just note that this is being recorded in July of 2025. So all of the information here is valid as of July of 2025. So do double check if you're watching this webinar much later than that, because things may have changed in the meantime. But at this time, the taxi costs €28, and you can get that directly at a taxi stand at the airport. A couple of other options, just to let you know what the full range of options are. There's a shuttle bus called Vola in Bus, and you can take that for €6 one way from the airport to the city. Or you can also book a private driver to transfer you by car, by private car, directly into the city. That's a little bit more than a taxi. It depends on the private driver company that you go with, but that ranges from 45 euros to 70 euros. Next, this is a question that we get quite often from our customers and our ItaliaPass members, and that is, do I need to or should I rent a car when I'm in Italy? Now, the answer to that really depends on what you have planned on your itinerary. So, especially because you'll be traveling to Florence, many of you will probably want to get out into the Tuscan countryside. Perhaps you're going to be staying at a farm stay, which is known as an agriturismo. A lot of these rural areas in the Tuscan countryside, as you can see here in the photo, they're not served by public transport. You really do need a car. So if you plan to explore outside of the main cities, then renting a car is a really good option for you. It may be the only way to get to certain destinations. If, however, you're planning to just visit the main cities, let's say you're going to visit Florence, you're also going to visit maybe Rome, maybe Milan, you can get around extremely easily. And in fact, we recommend just using high-speed trains. Don't bother with renting a car in those cases because not only are the high-speed trains often much faster than you would get there with a car, driving a car in the major cities is not recommended for visitors because of the fact that there's lots of traffic regulations. There are certain days and times when cars can't come into the historic center. It's not worth it, really. You can get around perfectly well within the main cities. Once you reach the main city by high-speed train, you can get around perfectly well by just using local public transport, taxis. Uber also services these cities, so you have plenty of transport options within the city. So, however, if you are going to be driving in rural areas and you're going to rent a car, you can rent with Italia Drive, which is one of our partner companies. And if you're an Italia Pass member, you will get $10 off each of your transactions there. Next, let's talk a little bit about public transport within Florence, how you're going to get around the city. Now, Florence is a very walkable city, so it's likely that you're going to walk most places. However, in the summer, it's extremely hot. There may be times when you don't feel like you want to walk to a place. And in that case, you can take public transport. Public transport in Florence is served by a company called Autolinee Toscane. That's the company that runs the buses. And trams are run by a company called Jest. There are electric minibuses. Those are circular routes. They're numbered and lettered by C. You can tell that the circular minibuses because the routes start with C and then have a number. Those are probably the buses you're going to take most often because they go through the main historic city center. Trams, those can help you avoid traffic jams, and those are best for the areas outside of the city. So, for example, like we talked about with tram T2 from the airport, most likely in the historic center, though, that's not something that you're going to use. Now, for tickets, which in Italian are called biglietto, one ticket is un biglietto, plural of that is biglietti. You can buy those at ticket machines. So the ticket machines that you will find around the city, maybe at the main, like at the main train station, for example. But more likely, you're going to find the tickets at the tabaccheria, which are the tobacconist shops. You can identify the tobacconist shops because they have a T hanging over a sign hanging over the door, or at newsstands throughout the city, or, which is probably the most convenient way to get your public transport ticket, just use a contactless payment method. So if you have a contactless credit or debit card, or even a smartphone contactless payment method like Apple Pay, you can use what's known here in Florence as tap and go. So you're just going to tap your card to the card reader on board the bus, and that will register as your ticket. As I mentioned before, when we were talking about getting into the city from the airport, the cost of a ticket is €1.70, and that gives you 90 minutes of unlimited rides on the public transport system within Florence. If you have a paper ticket and you're not using the contactless payment method, then you are going to want to validate your ticket upon first boarding the public transport, the bus. So the way that you do that is there's a machine on the bus. You're going to insert your ticket and it will spit it back out and it stamps it with the time so that way you know when the 90 minutes of validity for that ticket starts. The bus driver is not going to check your ticket. It's kind of like an honor system. So you'll want to have that ticket handy in case any inspectors come on board to check to make sure that you have a ticket. A couple of tips for what lines might be really nice as a visitor. Line 12 or 13 will take you to Piazzale Michelangelo. And from Piazzale Michelangelo, you can get a really beautiful panoramic view of the city. So I recommend trying that if you have time. Next, let's talk a little bit about restaurants. You're going to enjoy all the delicious food that you can eat here in Florence and how to avoid a couple of the most common tourist traps. So for restaurants, I would advise you to avoid the main tourist areas in Florence because those restaurants do tend to cater to tourists and not locals. The way that you can get into some of the more local restaurants is if you head out to neighborhoods such as Oltrarno and Sant'Ambrogio. In those neighborhoods, you might find you're likely to find more options that locals will go to, and it'll be less touristy. Granted, there are always tourists in Florence, but these are just a couple recommendations to get you out of the main crowded tourist hubs. So, a couple of the local specialties in Florence that you may have heard of that you might like to try while you're in Florence. So, you see the photo of the steak down there on the bottom left. That's a bistecca alla fiorentina. It's a very famous local specialty. The steak is sold by weight. So, and it's served, as you can see, like rare to medium rare. It's not served well done. That's just not traditionally the way that that's cooked. So you can try the Fiorentina, very famous local specialty. Also, another local specialty, fagioli all'uccelletto. Those are cannellini beans with garlic and sage, very typical Tuscan dish. Tuscany is known for a lot of these dishes with beans. And after dinner, dessert type of local specialty is known as cantucci e vinsanto. You can see that in the photo on the bottom right. The cantucci are what we would call typically, for example, in the United States, we'll just call them biscotti. Those are the crunchy almond biscuits or cookies that are typical here in Italy, but especially here in Florence. Those are known as cantucci. And Vinsanto, as you see in the photo, it's a sweet wine, and typically those cantucci are dipped into the wine that kind of softens them up. And that's kind of like a dessert, a typical thing that you'll find in Florence. You won't see that, for example, in Rome. It's a local specialty. In terms of local customs to be aware of, some things that visitors have pointed out or asked us about in the past. So something that's typical here that may not be as typical from where you're from. So for example, if you're coming from the United States, it's not typical to have tap water at the restaurant. So you will pay for water here at restaurants, and that's normal. It's not something they're trying to do to get more money out of you as a tourist. Typical local custom in Italy is to drink bottled water at the restaurant. In fact, they will ask you as you sit down, what kind of water would you like? They're going to ask you if you would prefer naturale, which is just still water, or frizzante, which is also sometimes called gassata or con gas, or even sometimes they'll say leggermente, which means lightly, but that's a fizzy water. So carbonated, a lot of the waters come from natural springs that have natural carbonation. So just be aware that that's normal here, and asking for tap water for free is not typically in the local customs. So lunch and dinner times are going to be probably a little bit later than what you are used to, say, for example, in the United States. In Italy, locals tend to eat lunch anywhere from starting at 1 to 1:30 and dinner starting around 8 to 8:30. The reason I mention that is because if you're going to want to eat at a very local restaurant and you're planning to eat dinner, say at 6 p.m., the local places, probably the kitchen is not going to be open at that time. So it doesn't mean you can't eat earlier than that, but you'll probably have to eat at more of a touristy type restaurant that's open all day long, or earlier dinner times. Local places are not going to seat you probably until around those times that I mentioned. A lot of times we do get questions about tipping. People ask, do I need to leave a tip? It's typical in the United States to leave, say, for example, 20%, 20% tip. Here in Italy, tipping is not a typical thing to do. Locals generally do not leave tips because the wait staff is paid a full salary and they do not work for tips. However, if you've really enjoyed your meal and you want to leave a courtesy type of a tip, it's typical to maybe leave like €1 per person, but certainly nothing in terms of a 20% tip. So if a restaurant is trying to um, tell you that you do need to leave a tip, then that's not true. That's probably they're more doing that because they see you as a tourist and think that you'll fall for that. And local restaurants that cater to local residents will not expect a tip from you. Asking for the check, I have this on the list because a lot of times people are not aware that here in Italy, it is not a typical custom to leave the check unless you ask for it. The reason for that is because going out to dinner here, going out to lunch, going out to eat with your family and friends is seen culturally as a time where you're spending time with your loved ones. So the waitstaff wants to be courteous and not make you feel rushed. That being the case, they're going to wait for you to ask for the check because they want you to feel that you can spend as much time as you want and need at the table enjoying your company. So if you're expecting them to bring the check and you're just waiting and thinking you're getting poor service because they're not bringing it, that actually just ask. They're doing that actually to try to respect your time at the table. So just know that that's a local custom and they will be more than happy to bring that when you ask for it. Next, a little bit about getting into the sites. So if you are an ItaliaPass member, then you have complimentary access to both the Uffizi and the Accademia galleries with your membership. So that's a great benefit of ItaliaPass membership. All you have to do is go into the special link that you'll get when you purchase your membership. You'll get a link to the benefits page. And you just click on that. It'll take you to the booking page and it will let you select your date and time to visit, and you will have those tickets for free entry. We do recommend that you book as far in advance as possible. ItaliaPass members also get $100 off of any tour at italiatours.com. So that's another great way to save money and go on a really nice walking tour with our expert tour guides. A couple of the tours that we offer in Florence include a tour called Heart of Florence and Tuscany in a day. We also have a tour that goes outside of Florence to San Gimignano with a boutique vineyard tour. So that's very unique and something you can do if you want to go off the beaten path a bit. There's also a Tuscany by Vespa tour. So if you're feeling adventurous and you want to do the Dolce Vita, you can take the Tuscany by Vespa tour, and just know that any of those tours within ItaliaPass membership are eligible for a $100 discount. A couple of the lesser known gems that not everybody knows about in Florence, but that are worth seeing if you feel like getting off the beaten path, or at least doing things that are a little bit more unique than the main touristy sites. So this first photo is a photo of the Officina Profumo Farmaceutica di Santa Maria Novella. So Santa Maria Novella is now, besides being the name of the main train station, it's also a very kind of a boutique perfume that comes from Florence. This is one of the oldest pharmacies in the world. It started out as a pharmacy back in the year 1612. It used to be connected to the Dominican monastery of Santa Maria Novella, hence the name. And back then it sold medicines made by the monks, but today it's a perfume shop. It's very elegant and beautiful, and it's a very nice place to visit. If you're looking for a really beautiful souvenir for yourself or for someone else, that might be an idea for you. Another place to try visiting that a lot of tourists don't necessarily get to is the Museo di San Marco. This museum is housed in a former Dominican convent, which was built between the years 1437 and 1443. And it contains works by Fra Angelico, who lived and worked there. In fact, you can see this painting that is here, the fresco. You can see one of his most famous works, which is the Annunciation, and that's there at the Museo di San Marco. Couple last local tips for you before we wrap up. You might want to stop by the Sant'Ambrogio market. Sant'Ambrogio is that neighborhood I told you about where you can go off a little bit off the beaten tourist path for a local restaurant. This is Florence's oldest market. It has a really nice atmosphere. It's a place that you can go to just to walk around and see. You can get something to eat there. As you can see, there's restaurants, fresh produce, and lots of local character and personality. So that's a nice place to stop by. Another thing that's really unique to Florence are what is known as buchette del vino, wine windows. These are things that have been revived. It used to be a tradition back in the times of the nobility, when there were vineyards owned by the nobility, and in order to not necessarily come into contact with the local people, servants would be at these wine windows, and locals could come up with their empty wine bottles and knock on the wine window, and the servant would take the bottle and go and fill it from the nobility's vineyard stock and sell it through that window. And this has kind of been revived. It actually kind of got revived when COVID was happening during the pandemic, because it was a convenient way to avoid contact. But it's also just something now that's kind of a fun local custom. So there's several wine windows that you'll find where you can knock, and as you see in the photo, they'll sell you a glass of wine that you can just drink right there on the street. In the list of references that we'll post on the ItaliaPass community, I will list some of the wine windows that you can visit. So that wraps up our Florence webinar. I hope that you got some interesting and helpful tips today. If you would like to have a list of links to the resources and the tips that I mentioned throughout the webinar, you can just visit the ItaliaPass community. That is community.italiapass.com. Go to the left sidebar and click on travel tips, and then you'll click the box on the right, which will take you to this list of resources and tips that were mentioned in this webinar. So I hope you have a wonderful trip to Florence. And as always, if you have any questions, please do visit us at the community, and we will be happy to help you with all your travel planning and questions about traveling in Italy. Buon viaggio!